What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome back to another Fantasy Puck video, guys. Today's video, I'm going to be breaking down some of my favorite trades to help set you up for fantasy playoffs. Now, we're about 6 weeks away from fantasy playoffs in most leagues. It usually starts on week 22. So this is a perfect time to trade for some players to help maximize your games played when it comes to fantasy playoffs. Now, I want to make a note that some of these players you may not be able to trade away if it's a keeper league, and I will talk about that a little bit later in this video. But for this video, guys, expect some 3 players I think you should be looking to sell, 2 players to sell high on, 1 player you could almost get rid of or just try and trade away. And then I'm going to be breaking down some hypothetical trades given the fantasy playoff strength of schedule and the teams that I think will not have good fantasy playoffs that you could be looking to trade away. This is going to be a good video, guys, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. So before we start this video, guys, I want to be jumping into some of the worst and best playoff schedules. And starting us off with the worst playoff schedules, these are teams with players that you should be looking to trade away or drop or get rid of. So we have 5 teams here with the bottom 5 of worst playoff schedules: San Jose, the Rangers, Winnipeg, Detroit, and Edmonton. Now, San Jose, by far the worst playoff schedule with 8 total games throughout 3 weeks and 0 off-night games. Jumping over to the Rangers with 8 total games, 2 off-night games, and then Winnipeg, Detroit, Edmonton, all with 9 games apiece and 2 games on the off nights. These are teams with players I would be looking to trade away. Now, like I said earlier, with San Jose and the most notable player being Macklin Celebrini, be careful if you're in a keeper league, trade him away. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, if you're in a keeper league, he likely has top 10 to 15 value given how good he's been in his rookie season. So be a little bit more cautious when in a keeper league versus a redraft league. In a redraft league, it really doesn't matter who you're looking to trade away, as long as you can help get good value and maximize that roster. And I'll jump into the better playoff schedule right now. Now, looking at the better playoff schedule, the best 5 teams here: Minnesota, as I've mentioned in a previous video, the Dallas Stars, Ottawa Senators, Chicago Blackhawks, and the Vancouver Canucks. So Minnesota leads the way here with by far the best playoff schedule with 11 total games and 6 off-night games. The only team to have more than 5 off-night games, and no other team has 12 total games for these 3 weeks, making Minnesota by far the most favorable team to target in trades. Now, you heard me mention this in my last trade video where I talked about some Minnesota players you should be looking to trade for. And later in this video, make sure you stay tuned. I'm going to be talking about some of the hypothetical trades to acquire some of these Minnesota Wild players. Now, the Dallas Stars here are one of the best teams to target because not only do they have 11 games and 3 off-night games, they actually have one of the easiest strength of schedules with 34.02 goals against per game over those 3 weeks for their opponents. So very, very favorable. Now, with the Ottawa Senators here, they don't have any off-night games, but they have 11 total games and the most favorable strength of schedule with 35.35 goals against per game. So this is definitely going to be a priority target here, especially for players that are a little bit lower in value. Now, with Chicago and Vancouver, both of them with 10 games played, so 1 less than the other 3 teams I mentioned. But Chicago has 5 off-night games and Vancouver has 4. Now, with Chicago here, the only issue is they don't have very many high-value players. I would say there's 2 notable: Connor Bedard, who in a keeper league may be very, very difficult to acquire, and Seth Jones on defense, who I mentioned in my last trade for players video. Now, in Vancouver here, they're a dumpster fire, and there may be some players that you can look to acquire at a lower value, and Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. So those would be the 2 targets from both of those teams. These teams have very favorable schedules. Now, let's just jump into some of the players that I think you should be looking to sell high on. Starting us off, we have Brayden Point of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, you likely drafted Point in the 2nd round, and he's been very good for you this season. But there are some things that I need to be noting on why you should be looking to sell high on Brayden Point. Now, to lead us off, 27.8% shooting percentage this season. Not only does he lead the league, this is the highest of his career by nearly 6%. So not only that with Point, but his 9.3 goals above expected makes him the 2nd luckiest player in the league, with Leon Draisaitl leading the way at almost 13 goals above expected. But it's very difficult for me to justify trading away Leon Draisaitl. Whereas with Brayden Point, I just think there are too many underlying factors as to why you should be trading away. So not only does he have the highest goal rate of his career at 0.66 goals per game right now, His shot rate, 2.37 per game, are the lowest we've seen since 2020-2021, where his goal rate was just 0.41 goals per game. So with Point here, my biggest concern, not only is the shooting percentage high, but he doesn't really contribute to any other categories at an above average level other than his goal scoring and his power play point production. So if we begin to see this goal scoring go down, regress back to the mean, he's not really going to be producing anywhere else because he doesn't hit on those peripheral categories. The 2.37 shots per game is a little bit concerning for me. Now, we did say the same thing about Sam Reinhart, who's a noted, not a big shot volume player, but a very good goal scorer who was a sell high. He's almost going on 2 years as a sell high now. But with Brayden Point here, I think you can get in return a top 10 to 15 player. Now, I mentioned Minnesota has the best playoff schedule. Can you trade Brayden Point for an injured Kirill Kaprizov right now? As I'm recording on the 22nd of January, Kirill Kaprizov has resumed skating. So can you get in return a Kirill Kaprizov with 11 games and 6 off nights that should have better production moving forward than Brayden Point? That's a trade I'd be looking to make right now. With Point, I still think that this is unsustainable for him. We're going to be getting to see that goal rate go down, the shooting percentage drop a little bit, unless he begins to get that shot rate up, which is we haven't seen a 41 game sample so far this season. So I think this is a great time to look to sell high on Brayden Point. Moving on, we have Mackenzie Blackwood of the Colorado Avalanche, the newly acquired goaltender after having a complete dumpster fire in the back end between Georgiev getting traded for Blackwood, Noonan getting moved over to Nashville. It's just been a nightmare for goaltending in Colorado Avalanche world right now, but they've acquired Blackwood and he has been one of the best, if not the best goaltenders since the acquisition. 13 games started, 9-4-1 record, a 197 goals against average, and 928 save percentage since joining the Avalanche. Now, for me, and I've said this before with a lot of the goalie shoutouts in preseason, where I talked about Jack Campbell just not having enough volume, so draft Stuart Skinner, Ilya Samsonov not really being a volume starter, and draft Joseph Woll. It's kind of the same thing with Mackenzie Blackwood here. Now, if you look on screen in his career, the most games started he's had was last season with the San Jose Sharks, 41 games started. The biggest issue with Blackwood, although he is to me a good goaltender and above average goaltender, he's dealt with a lot of injury in his career, and that concerns me quite a bit. Now, you also have to remember with Blackwood, he was likely a free agent pickup for you, meaning it's difficult to get rid of some of these players that have been top performers for you, especially he's been likely carrying the load for you over the last 3 weeks, unless you own some of the top goalies like Ottinger, Shesterkin, or Connor Hellebuck. But don't get too hung up with Mackenzie Blackwood right now. Now, I can see these stats regressing. The best goals against average of his career was 3.04 back in 2020. Best save percentage of his career, same thing, 9.02 back in 2020. So it's been a while since he's produced stats above league average. And although he's on a much better Colorado Avalanche team, I have a lot of concern with his workload moving forward. With Wedgwood getting healthier, maybe they start to split. Maybe it's a 60-40 to try and reduce some of that workload. But I think this is a great time to look to buy low in some of those elite goaltenders that have been struggling so far this season. Saros, I mentioned Shesterkin there with a question mark. You probably won't be able to get him for Shesterkin, but just a hypothetical. Jeremy Swayman's another good example of that. The biggest concern for me with Blackwood right here is sustainability. Can he keep this up for the rest of the season? He's never played this many games played in his career. If he hits 45, 50 starts, there's going to be a little bit of concern there, but this seems like a great time to try and trade away Mackenzie Blackwood. The last player here before I jump into the hypothetical trade, so make sure you stay tuned for that, is Morgan Rielly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Before I jump into all of it, I just want to say with the Leafs players, they always retain their value more than any other team's players, meaning that Rielly likely, although he's been struggling, still holds some value. So with Rielly here, biggest concern is that he's continually on and off power play 1, which gives a big hit to the point production. Right now, as of the last game with Tavares injured, it was Bobby McMann and Matthew Knies on the top power play unit and Morgan Rielly skating on the second unit. So there are other concerns aside from him not being on power play 1, but power play 1 is likely a big contributor to this. A 5-year low in average time on ice with 21 per night right now. There are 2 other defensemen, OEL and Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Jake McCabe, that are skating as well at 21 minutes per night. So the minutes are a little bit concerning. As you can see in his career, when he plays over 23 minutes, close to 24 minutes, in 2021, 0.83 points per game, in 2023, 0.81 points per game. So his production is highly contingent on being on that top power play unit and playing those big minutes. Leafs players, again, they always retain their value. All of Morgan Rielly's peripherals, his stats, everything is down this season. He's could be a drop in some leagues, which Leafs fans are kind of calling for in real life. Just get rid of him. But for right now, he could be a drop. But I still think he does have some name value, being a Leafs defenseman that's been there for a while, and also just being Morgan Rielly. Now, I do think there's no real reason for him to turn the season around, given they don't really trust him to be on that top power play unit. We saw OEL there for a while. Now we're seeing a 5-forward mix, which I feel like we've seen over the last month. So with Rielly here, it seems like a good time to either drop him for another rosterable defenseman or look to trade him, and hopefully he retains some value. Now let's jump into some of the hypothetical trades for playoffs. So on the left here, well, actually in the bottom right, you have just a small me, which is likely good for you. But in the top left here, we have the best playoff schedules as I've gone through earlier in the video. If you skip that part, those are the top 5 teams. And then below that, we have the top 5 worst teams in terms of playoff schedule. So starting us off here, we have a blockbuster move. And I talked with the FP guys about this, and I was outvoted 3-1 in terms of trading Panarin to acquire Boldy. I think it's completely fine acquiring Boldy, especially if you want to make a run in playoffs, given he's going to allow you to have 3 extra games and then 4 extra off night games. And if we compare the stats this season, so I'm using their 2024 stats as well as the fantasy points using standard Yahoo scoring. The goal scoring for Artemi Panarin a little bit higher, the point production a little bit higher, Boldy higher shot rate, hits and blocks. And if you compare their fantasy points using Yahoo scoring, Boldy 432.6, Panarin 413.1. Panarin definitely still holds a lot of value given the name. He was drafted likely in the 2nd round. But the thing I want to say is if it's a keeper league, it's really, really close. There's a lot of issues going on right now in New York Ranger land. I don't know what's happening with some of their star players. Panarin's been producing a little bit less than what we saw last year, but I think it's a good opportunity for you to give away a guy with the 2nd worst schedule to acquire a guy with very similar stats with the best schedule. And with Boldy, his production's actually still been very good, even though Kirill Kaprizov has been out of the lineup. So hopefully by the time you make playoffs, if you make a trade like this for Boldy, you'll have Kirill Kaprizov back healthy and Boldy producing like he usually does, like he's been all season. Now, the next trade here is for redraft leagues. I would not be making this trade if it's a keeper league, given how good Celebrini looks to be as a prospect right now as an 18-year-old, being extremely, extremely productive this season. But you can look to move away Macklin Celebrini and acquire Wyatt Johnston. Johnston not only has an extra position of eligibility, but a much better playoff schedule with the Stars above 11 games, 3 games on the off nights, where you trade away the San Jose Sharks player with 8 total games, 0 games on the off nights, meaning 1 week they'll have 2 games. So you can trade away Celebrini with 34 points this season, acquire Johnston with a little bit higher points, a little bit more games played. The production overall has been relatively the same, with Johnston 354.9 fantasy points, Celebrini 343.5, a difference of 10.6. I just did that quick math in my head there. I think that's right. But this is a good trade to acquire a guy with a much better playoff schedule in Johnston, hopefully some better upside for the second half of the season. Now, lastly, let's trade away some defensemen here. We got Adam Fox, who I always say this, and me and the FP guys talk about this. Him and Heiskanen are 2 guys that are very good on ice, real life defensemen, but not so good fantasy defensemen given their significant lack of peripherals, and acquired Jake Sanderson. Now, you may be thinking, you know, looking at Sanderson, looking at Fox. Fox is just such a bigger name player. But if you look at the production this season, it's relatively the same. Now, Sanderson has been a big power play point producer. Fox typically is too. Fox has better point production, but less shots on goal production, less block production. And if you compare the fantasy points on standard Yahoo scoring, Sanderson has been a little bit better at 361.9 fantasy points versus Fox with 349.5. Like I mentioned earlier, the Ottawa Senators have a very, very good playoff schedule in terms of strength of schedule, the best in the NHL for those last 3 weeks, meaning this will be a good time for Sanderson to hopefully pot a few points and hopefully bolster your fantasy team with extra games played over Adam Fox. In a keeper league, this is a close one for me. I'm definitely curious on your thoughts, but I think it's a good move to set yourself up for the fantasy playoffs. Moving on now to the final hypothetical trades, another blockbuster, trading away Igor Shesterkin, acquiring Jake Ottinger. Now, these 2 goalies have very, very similar stats aside from the wins and the goals against average. So we know the Rangers have been struggling a lot this season. So Shesterkin's win numbers are a little bit lower than Jake Ottinger, but overall the numbers look pretty much identical. Again, you're going to be trading away Shesterkin that has 8 games, 2 off night games in those last 3 weeks, meaning maybe he plays 6 of those. And then Ottinger with 11 games over the last 3 weeks, maybe he plays 9. So you get 3 extra starts from a goaltender. In a keeper league, this trade's pretty much identical to me. So I think this is a good move to acquire a #1 goalie in fantasy, trading away your #1 goalie. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about that trade, especially in a keeper league. Now, let's trade away one of the hottest players in the league right now on one of the hottest power plays in the league, Lucas Raymond, a team with 9 games and 2 off-night games, and acquire who other than Matt Boldy. Very, very even trade. Both players with 47 games played. Raymond has the edge in terms of goals, assists, and points. Boldy has 63 more shots than Lucas Raymond, meaning it's likely that Boldy's goal numbers will probably end higher than Lucas Raymond. I like the player. I always go for players with higher shot totals, but the numbers, the fantasy points, very similar, just a 4 difference. You got a guy with 2 extra games and 4 extra off-night games in Matt Boldy. So this seems like a very, very favorable move. In a keeper league, it's almost identical. Lastly, 2 struggling centermen that have been hurting fantasy managers all season long, Mika Zibanejad and Joel Eriksson Ek. I think this is a good time to move away Mika Zibanejad. I traded him in the FantasyPuck Patreon League for Kevin Fiala like 4 or 5 weeks ago. It was offered to me and I accepted. 2 guys with just sole center position. But with Mika Zibanejad this year, it's been a struggle the entire season with just 9 goals on 103 shots for 299 fantasy points. Well, Joel Eriksson Ek, you get a little bit different of a player with less point production, I would say. Very close. But we know how good he is in the peripheral categories with 89 shots on goal, 54 hits, 25 blocks. He was a very good peripheral wise last season. He's just been subject to a lot of injuries this season that has hurt his production, hurt his games played. But I think this is a great time to buy low on Joel Eriksson Ek and get rid of Mika Zibanejad, who you likely have been frustrated with for most of the season. That will do it for the players to trade away video. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for, I think it was Luis Mancuso who commented saying, can you run down the worst playoff schedules and some players to trade away? So that's exactly what I did today. Hopefully you enjoyed the hypothetical trades. We have about 4 weeks until the fantasy trade deadline, which is in most of my leagues on February 26th. So hopefully I'm going to be able to get out 1 or 2 more trade videos. If you enjoyed the hypothetical trades, let me know in the comment section below, and I'm definitely open for discussion. My favorite part is just talking in the comment section below, so don't be afraid to voice your opinions, ask me some trades, talk about how some of my trades are definitely not fair. And guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.